Welcome to the Domain Name Wire podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Alleman, and this is episode number 574. Last week's Super Bowl featured a lot of great commercials, and one in particular was good for the domain name industry. Squarespace's commercial featured actress Emma Stone searching for emmastone.com, only to find out that it's taken. The ad tells people to get their domain before someone else does, and that's something everyone in the domain business can get behind. Well, it turns out Emma Stone actually owns her domain and acquired it last year. If you type it in right now, it goes to a Squarespace promotion. In addition to the 30-second ad spot that ran during the Super Bowl, Squarespace filmed some other videos with Emma. I want to play a short clip from one of those videos. To set the stage, Emma Stone is in her trailer with her agent, and her agent is on the phone talking to someone who is supposedly the owner of emmastone.com. Here's how that fictitious negotiation to buy the domain goes.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
I won't sell.
He says he won't sell.
He's posturing.
Yeah, he's posturing. You're posturing.
Okay. What's the offer?
He says, what's the offer?
The offer is I'm Emma Stone, and I should own emmastone.com.
Well, that's not how the negotiation actually went. I know that because today's guest represented the seller in the transaction selling emmastone.com. Brian Harbin is the founder of Grit Brokerage, which handles both domain sales and acquisitions. Last year, he was approached by the owner of the domain name who had recently received an offer for the domain. The owner hired Grit Brokerage to manage the process. Today, Brian shares how it all went down. Brian and I also talk about other Super Bowl commercials and the domains featured in them, including AI.com. Now let's hear from our sponsor, Salve.com, and its domain auctions. Salve auctions are a great way to liquidate domain names. I've sold a few domains through Salve auctions. It was quick and easy. There was a great transfer process as well. If your domain is at Salve, it transfers automatically. Best of all, sellers pay just a 4% commission. Learn more and start selling your domains at Salve. Go to salve.com/DNW/sell. That's sav.com/DNW/sell. I was traveling last week. It's the time of year where most of us like to get out of Seattle for a little while and find some sunshine. So I recorded this show early, so I don't have the typical news segment for this show. However, I did continue to write last week, so go check out domainnamewire.com for all the latest news. Now, let's chat with Brian Harbin. My guest this week is Brian Harbin. He is founder of Grit Brokerage. Brian, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks. Excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so the Super Bowl 60 recently happened, and as a Seattle transplant, it was an exciting game for me. I know a lot of people thought it was a little slow and boring. It was a defensive game, but it was exciting, and I think it was exciting for the domain name industry, seeing all these commercials, domains that were involved. And you were involved in one of the domains that was used in the Super Bowl this year. So that was emmastone.com. So let's talk about that commercial. It was Squarespace that ran the commercial, right? What did you think of the ad overall?
I thought the ad was great. I mean, I think it really paints a picture of that pain point that people have. And I think people can connect the idea of most simply to their name, right? That's where people have the most simplest emotional connection. Obviously, that pain point gets a lot greater when you run a $1 million or $1 billion company and your exact match domain, you don't have it, which, I think we experience a lot more in the types of premium domains that we deal with. But I think for the majority of people to see that, they ran a similar ad with John Malkovich a couple years ago where he was trying to get johnmalkovich.com. And, again, he was kind of yelling at the guy in the ad. And so I think Emma Stone just kind of further displays that point of the frustration of not having your exact match domain.
So in the ad, Emma Stone is sitting there typing, searching for emmastone.com. It says it's taken. She gets really mad. She throws the laptop down. She does it a couple times. There's an extended version online where, she does it even more times. So, but then it says, hey, get your name before someone else does. So I think for the domain industry, awesome message. But if you type in emmastone.com, you find out she actually owns it now, and you were involved with that. So tell me, when did this transaction for emmastone.com happen?
So this was in early October of 2025. So 4 or 5 months ago.
Okay. And how did you get involved in this transaction?
Yeah. So the owners of the domain name reached out to me. Our first conversation was very cryptic in the fact that they didn't really want to share the exact name yet. They wanted to just understand the process. And they just said, look, our domain is also the same name of a famous actor. And how would you handle this situation? So we went back and forth for a few days. They agreed to proceed. And then they had an offer come in that they thought, might be from her team, based on what other similar first name, last name domains go for. And so I helped them kind of just manage expectations in terms of, hey, if this is them, this could be, hey, you've owned this domain for 25 years. If this is them, this is going to be kind of your chance to sell it. So if you go too high or ask for too much, it could, certainly kill the deal. At the same time, obviously, I was incentivized to get them the most we could. So took over the negotiations, and we had it closed and paid out and domain transferred within 8 days of taking over.
Wow. So just to be clear here, the seller had received an inquiry, an offer, or an overture from someone, and then they reached out to you to get you involved in the transaction.
That's right.
So why do you think they came to a domain broker? First of all, and then you specifically, once they received this inquiry?
Yeah, I think most people just don't want to mess it up, and that it's something they've never really had to deal with before. And so just having their own professional that's going to help advise them, that's been through it before, that can help ensure and protect their best interest, at the same time making sure everything gets done safely and securely. So I think
it's kind of like buying a house, or hey, why not pay a realtor who knows the market, knows how to do this, especially if it's something you've never done before.
That's right. And especially when it comes to something that is, obviously a name is going to be a lot more of an emotional decision for both parties, right? The sellers had owned it for 25 years. They bought it for their needs. There was an emotional attachment there. At the same time, as you can see in other portrayals of Emma's negotiation, of her getting on the phone, and obviously she's very heated and everything. And the fact that she used, an intermediary as well to kind of help protect her emotions. So the fact that, when two professionals kind of come in to get the deal done, that emotion is taken out of it, and we can focus on getting it transacted and closed, and all parties are happy.
Yeah, there's and I'll put this in the show notes here. So in addition to the Super Bowl commercial, they have some additional videos that they put out. And one that's very funny is Emma Stone in her trailer with her agent. And her agent is trying to negotiate to buy the domain. And Emma's getting all heated in the background. And then finally she's like, I'll talk to him. And she's like, or tell him I'll ruin him and all this sort of stuff. But I assume the negotiation was not like that, because there were cooler heads involved here and brokers, right?
Exactly. But, again, it also does kind of help paint the picture of how emotional those transactions could be if you don't have those proper protections in place, like using your own intermediary.
Sure. How did they find you?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was a Google search, and, they might have contacted other folks, but after that initial conversation and, some back and forth, they were actually traveling abroad at the time. So it was husband and wife together that I was talking to each time. And we kind of went through all the different scenarios, and I think they felt comfortable with what I suggested, and we moved forward. And so I'm pretty sure it was a Google search, though.
And when you represent a seller like that, you're just taking a percentage of what they get, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So, I think it was interesting to have you involved in this transaction, because when I originally watched the video where she says, another Emma Stone owned the domain for a long time, I started looking at the who is history. I'm like, that doesn't look right, and I looked at the archive and that sort of thing. So it was interesting that you were involved and could say, yes, that is actually what happened, but here's the wrinkle in it. I'm curious, when did you find out? Because you did this transaction last year. When did you find out, and how did you find out that it was going to be part of a Super Bowl ad.
It was actually Thursday on the ICA group thread.
The Internet Commerce Association WhatsApp group. Yeah.
That's right. And Jothan had put it on there, and I said, oh, wow, I guess there it is. I mean, we knew we thought she might have a movie coming up or something like that. But, obviously a Super Bowl ad is just as relevant. Sure.
So the seller reaches out to you, you start working on this. Your assumption, I assume, going on is that Emma Stone, the actress, is the buyer, I assume, right? Yeah. So talk to me about, you kind of alluded to this earlier, but who had the upper hand in this negotiation?
I mean, I think at the end of the day, and this is what I tried to help the sellers understand is, obviously if Emma Stone, we're 99% sure it's her, right? Based on the offer. And so obviously there's motivation on their end. At the same time, the sellers, again, having owned this for 25 years, it was a noticeable offer. And so I think also just helping the sellers understand that, okay, this is potentially the perfect buyer, right? Because if she doesn't get it, anybody else would be scared to launch something on it. So if you don't work out a deal here, then your best offer could evaporate, right? So it's not going to be liquid at what this offer is if for some reason she decides to move on. So I think at the end of the day, sure, there might be a little bit of upper hand in the seller and the fact that they know that she wants it. At the same time, if you don't treat it with respect in terms of just trying to get the best price you can as smoothly and quickly as possible, then the seller could lose out as well. So I think there is some pressure on both sides. But, obviously in a case like this, the seller is going to have a slight of an advantage knowing that, someone famous is coming after your domain name.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's not like a generic, like a domain that multiple buyers could be interested in, right? Where it's easy to, oneword.com. It's easy to just, even if it were just Emma.com, right? There's so many potential buyers, brands, companies, that sort of thing. Whereas there's really one ideal buyer here. I'm curious, and I don't know if you have thoughts on this or any inside knowledge. I'm curious if the acquisition was because Squarespace said, hey, we want you to do a commercial or something like that. Because the timing is just like how it, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I also think about too that let's say that the sellers were not open to selling for, let's say they wanted some astronomical number that her team wasn't willing to pay. Well, she might not have gotten the ad because she wouldn't have been a good candidate.
Right.
And you kind of lose that opportunity on both sides, really. She might be tainted of never wanting to touch the domain again because of, that lost opportunity. One thing we did uncover with this is emma-stone.com is in use. And it appeared at the time that it might be owned by Emma Stone's team. But I think the more we researched it, it looks like it's a fan site, which was kind of interesting as well.
Right. Sorry, I'm just looking over that and I've gotten drawn in here on my other monitor and looking at, all of her performances and all that sort of stuff. So the Squarespace, okay, so negotiation you said takes about 8 days, you said, from start to finish. So, I mean, it was helpful having a professional on their side and on your side, would you say?
Yeah, definitely. Used escrow.com, which was super smooth. And so, yeah, that definitely helped streamline the process.
Interestingly, as someone pointed out, the domain is at Mark Monitor, which is a good registrar to keep an important domain at. They have all the bells and whistles for corporate domain management, even though this was a Squarespace commercial. But she did register other versions of Emma Stone through Squarespace that she mentions in one of the videos that she did. It was kind of interesting when I was listening to that because I was writing a story about this, and she started saying, I got Emma Stone this and that. And it was kind of funny because I only, there were a few of them where I was like, what did she just say? There's so many top level domains out there. I didn't quite understand, what, I think she might have gotten emmastone.condo and I just couldn't even understand what she was saying there, which was kind of humorous to me. But actually, no, there's no emmastone.condo. So it must have been something else. There's no .condo. So, but, I think it was great for the name drop. I don't know. Several of those domains were Identity Digitals. I don't know if they were involved in that, but they've done some marketing with Squarespace as well.
Yeah, no, I thought that was a great plug because especially from Squarespace is like, don't just come and buy one domain. Why don't you buy 6 domains, right? That have these other extensions. Yeah. And Squarespace, of course, they've always been a big domain registrar from people that came in to build websites on domains. So they were kind of a website first and then attach a domain to it. Then they bought Google Domains a couple of years ago. It's just made them, I don't know, on a .com basis, I think the number 4 registrar overnight, maybe even higher than that. But one thing, and so this commercial too, which I think was fantastic for domain investors, right? And the domain industry at large, which was get your domain before someone else does. The only thing I'm like, what a missed opportunity is Squarespace doesn't sell premium domains through like Afternic, Cito, that sort of thing. And I think it could have been huge for us as domain investors if they did. Yeah, no, I agree. I think, but and one thing about the way the sequence went, you mentioned her, every time she types in her name and doesn't see it, she smashes a computer or breaks it, gets another one. The funny thing about that is the reality is obviously people don't do that. The first thing they do is they go to their browser and be like, how do I acquire my exact domain name? Which would then point to a broker or someone that's probably not Squarespace, right?
Right. So, and then, Google Domains did have premium domains. They started out at $5,000 max, and then they switched to $10,000. So I'm hoping that Squarespace eventually gets there. It was interesting on last week's show, I had Bob Mountain, who kind of helped build up the Afternic network back in the day. And he was talking about how registrars originally thought, no one's going to come buy a domain for $5,000 through us, right? They're used to paying $10, $20, $30. And as soon as they turn it on, they're like, wow, okay, so people are. So I hope Squarespace does listen to the podcast. They've been on it. I hope they're listening. I hope they get there. And I'll also be curious to see here. So it's February. They're offering, $5 domain as part of the Super Bowl promo and that sort of thing. I'll be curious what that does in several months' time once we get the full numbers from VeriSign on February. So let's talk about other Super Bowl ads because, that's the big part of the Super Bowl. Half the people, if not more, tune in just for the ads. I personally thought, I was texting with my brother during the game and I'm like, I don't know if it's because I live in Seattle now. So it's the first time I care about who wins the Super Bowl or not. I thought it was a good game. But of course, the commercials are what a lot of people tune in for. So what did you think overall?
Well, actually, speaking to the game, Maureen is a big Patriots fan. I know she was pulling for the Patriots, but funny enough, the Seahawks, their quarterback was my fraternity brother at University of Georgia.
No kidding.
So I was he's younger than me, and I didn't know him. We didn't overlap, but a lot of my buddies knew him. And he was already, even in college, was locally coaching at a high school football team. And so he's been in it for a long time. So really, I wanted to see him get that win. But I agree. From a domain standpoint, it's just great to see which companies that, it's going to cost you $10 million plus, just for the ad spot. And then you've got a production on top of it. So which companies, feel like their message, they can get out there in 30 seconds to literally the entire world. And what are you going to say? And then how are you going to then capture that traffic to then monetize all the money that you're spending on this ad? And so, we've seen this play out in years past. A few years back, we had helped greenlight.com acquire that domain before they did the Super Bowl ad with the guy from Modern Family and the unicorn. And of course, you know the story last year about rocket.com acquiring that domain before the Super Bowl ad. Now AI.com acquiring that domain before the Super Bowl ad. And so, and it's great to see it funnel back down to the importance of that domain name. I thought it was great for, obviously .ai, Claude, CLAUDE.ai was advertising. We saw row.co, so we saw some non.com extensions, which is great for the industry as well. I thought Wix had a great commercial about the website builder. And so it's just great seeing, and even other premium domains. I saw ramp, RAMP.com advertise, apartments.com, homes.com. And so it's great to see a lot of these companies that understand the value of having that exact match, brand domain for their company and putting it out on a massive scale.
Yeah, let's dig into a couple of those. You mentioned Claude, of course, the AI tool that is quickly becoming a favorite amongst a lot of people. They promoted, was it Claude.ai that they promoted?
They did, yep.
And you're brokering a similar name, right?
That's right. We're actually selling Claude without the E, so CLAUD.ai. And it's priced at $19,000 as of now. So if you're spending $10 million, it might have been a good pickup to go ahead and just buy that. But there's always going to be things that people overlook when they're making these types of decisions, but that's okay.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, I'd be curious if we get a lot of traffic, type in traffic. It's funny. I was thinking of typo domains during the game because I went to watch it, and I don't have like YouTube TV or Sling or anything like that. So I was like, okay, I need to get a Peacock subscription to watch the game. And I went in, and when I opened up my Roku, the first thing was get Paramount Plus. And, Paramount, Peacock, they both start with P. I don't even, there's so many streaming brands. So I start to sign up for that. And I'm like, oh, crap, that's the wrong one. And that's the second time I've done that, too. I remember helping someone who wanted to watch something that was on Peacock or Paramount, and I signed up for a free trial of the other one. So I was thinking about domains from the moment I started watching a game yesterday, because I almost accidentally signed up for the wrong streaming service. So, Claude without the E, I bet it got a bit of traffic here. You mentioned AI.com. Of course, the news recently came out that Larry Fisher helped broker that domain for $70 million. And I remember when they first started marketing it, I think the press release or something said, $100 million, or it could sell for $100 million. I was like, come on, guys. And I mean, 70 million is awfully darn close. What do you think about this sale overall? What do you think it does for the industry?
Well, it sets a new benchmark, that's for sure. I mean, voice.com at 30 million was one that, was a huge one at the time and is one that people still talk about. But now that you're at 70 million, it sets a new bar. And I think it says a lot about AI and the amount of money that people are investing in that industry. And again, that, even though I think .ai recently hit 1 million registrations, if not more, they've done a price increase recently too. And, obviously we've seen on the aftermarket just tons of 6-figure .ai sales, really for 5 or 6 years now. But again, AI.com, it does go back to owning the .com, and all these other ones are good until you can get kind of that upgraded version of your brand.
Yeah, I wonder, it doesn't look like they wildcarded AI.com at the subdomain level, but I bet it gets a lot of traffic from people that don't really know .ai. I know we do in the domain industry, but the typical person who sees it, we've seen this with new top level domains, they'll type in, something.ai.com because that's just what they're used to adding to it. So I bet it gets a lot of traffic there. And, the thing with voice.com, I kind of always dismissed that. I mean, obviously it was an outlier sale. It was huge, but I also kind of dismissed it because the company that bought it had raised billions of dollars in an ICO, initial coin offering. And then on the other side, you had a seller, Michael Saylor from what's now Strategy, was MicroStrategy at the time, who held out for top dollar. I was like, do we ever see this again? I know there have been some other sales that just are private that are kind of around that range, but to have another public sale, let alone being more than 2x, is just phenomenal. And then you figure, like you said, they probably spend $10 million on their Super Bowl commercial. Their production wasn't that great. So I know they might have used AI to make it at the last minute. And then, for those that tried to go to the domain during the game, it went down. They didn't have the infrastructure. Apparently, the only way I almost signed up, the only way you could sign up during the game was, connecting your Google account, sign in with Google. I think part of the issue was they overwhelmed sign in with Google, and the infrastructure there. So like you said, you can execute on a lot of this like Claude does, and then just miss these small things that end up being a big deal.
Yeah, what's interesting, I'll add to that as well, because this morning I did go into AI.com and I typed in a few handles and none of them were available. So I just kind of moved on. So I feel like too, there's also kind of that missed opportunity of like, I'll type in my top 3 or 4, and if they're not available, I don't know if they were held back. Some of the good ones are maybe reserved, or if that many people went registered.
I mean, the whole thing, I know they had to launch this quickly, but, the website doesn't say anything about who's behind it. Well, if you go to company news, it says, they launched and it mentions who's behind it, but there's no like about page. There's no, there's very little on it as of we're recording this the day after the Super Bowl. So there's not much on it. And then it's like, claim your handle for what? It's supposed to be an autonomous agent system, like, where you can set AI agents to work for you. But, it's just basically get your handle and then continue with Google. And so there's not much there, which is kind of a missed opportunity. But I do think, people are like AI.com, that's huge. Obviously, news is going everywhere. I saw recently, China's main, state news organization, talked about the sale and that sort of thing. So if nothing else, I think it sets a new benchmark for the industry. I think it's a great story for all of us. And, it also shows how crypto money has impacted the domain space. Crypto goes up and down. It's been doing that a lot. But, you figure the buyer of voice.com and the buyer of AI.com just had an insane amount of funny money, if you will, real money, but money that they just made from the crypto business.
Yeah, I don't know, because I know the AI.com sale happened a while back. I don't remember what crypto was at the time.
That's right.
Because I know it's dropped from 100 to 70, even below 70, I think,
Bitcoin,
at this point.
Yeah, it's a good question. One other detail here is the buyer paid solely in crypto. We'll see if the seller actually cashed that out right away into cash or not. If it was crypto, they might be a little bit underwater on that, but they're still doing okay. I'm not going to feel bad for them here. You mentioned another commercial was Row.co. That was the Serena Williams one, I think, where they're promoting GLP-1s. That's always, .co is obviously tricky because a lot of people type in .com. But in the case of Row.co, you have that rhyming, which helps.
I agree. I mean, I think at the end of the day, it's, the non.coms can absolutely work. And I think, like you said, the memorability of it, the fact that they've always been Row.co, they've stayed consistent with that, which I appreciate. We've seen some companies that even buy the .com and they redirect to their non.com. Again, that's just, it's, kind of a power play, which again, I respect and admire that because they're owning, basically a digital fortress around your brand.
And, I should mention one of the founders of Row is another domain broker, Rob Schutz, who was snagged, does a lot of buyer brokering and such as well. So let's see, I'm trying to think back to any of the commercials. Were there any other big, you mentioned homesandapartments.com, that commercial, they've advertised in the Super Bowl a lot, but they're like, go to, and they show apartments.com or homes.com in the same ad, and it's very much about these great domain names. Any others that you remember that really caught your eye?
Yeah, ramp.com, that name really stood out as a great domain name that I thought was a good ad and memorable. Again, I think Wix had a great ad with their, website building platform. But yeah, just, a lot of the technology companies. And again, I think a lot of this, for me, a turning point in this industry was 2020 when everything happened and more companies really started to realize, okay, how do we get more customers online? And they started to realize how much overhead they're saving and all the expenses that are lower by branding online. And so, getting that perfect domain name is just going to make all things easier. So I think that's a trend that has continued to grow from then. Yeah.
Brian, really exciting times. Congrats here. Tell me a little bit more for those that aren't familiar with Grit Brokerage. What makes you unique compared to, say, other brokerages? There are a lot of choices out there.
Yeah, so Grit Brokerage, we've got 8 on our team. We have a combined 75 plus years of domain brokering experience. So just a lot of industry knowledge. We specialize in doing outbound sales to end users. We actually love doing outbound sales. So that's one thing that we do well. Obviously, we do a ton on the acquisition side. We get so much repeat business from customers that once we either help them sell or acquire a domain, help them get domains for their brand. We've done a monthly newsletter that goes out to thousands and thousands of buyers every month for the last 6 years. So, our newsletter helps keep us front and center. And, we go to a lot of the domain conferences. And I think too, just the fact that we're easy to get in touch with and we're, very efficient in all of our systems and getting back to people and follow up and just the amount of transactions that we do. A lot of brokerages do tend to focus on like the 6-figure and up based on our model of, having a larger broker team. We do a lot of deals from hundreds or thousands of dollars up to the millions. So we carry all different aspects of acquisitions and sales. So just being able to handle all different types of sizes of deals.
I mean, when you deal, because it is unique that you deal with, say, a $5,000 or $10,000 domain, which obviously means there's not a whole lot of commission available for you. You're still outbounding those names?
Yeah. So, typically the more experienced brokers in our team, we're doing the larger, outbound and acquisition. So, we've brought on some people with some experience in the industry. We start them off and take them through the academy and, teach them about brokering. And so they kind of start with those smaller names and doing outbound and then work their way up to the larger names. So, essentially building a sales organization of hiring and developing and training and, helping people become domain brokers.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, people can sign up for the newsletter at gritbrokerage.com, right?
That's right.
Okay.
Yep.
So you can go there, you can check it out. You can learn more about Brian and his organization. Again, they've been involved in domains for a long time. And congrats on the Emma Stone transaction. That's an exciting one, even though I know it wasn't your biggest, it's still exciting to be involved with a deal like that.
Yes, it's fun for sure and always makes for a good story. So
yeah,
I appreciate you covering it and asking me about it.
All right. My guest this week has been Brian Harbin. He is the founder of Grit Brokerage. Again, you can head to gritbrokerage.com. And if you want to see the Emma Stone videos, I'll link to those in the show notes here. That's a wrap on this week's Domain Name Wire podcast. You can listen to all previous episodes at dnw.com/podcast or on your favorite podcast app. Thanks for listening.